reveille, donks.
Look at us now, tip to tip. This is our life. This is our passion. That's the spirit we bring to this show.
I'm Luke Thomas.
I'm Brian Campbell.
This is Morning Combat.
The fight is just about on here in Las Vegas for the final time this week. Morning Combat back at you. Brian Campbell, Luke Thomas, just moments removed from what happened behind that wall over the MGM Grand Garden Arena and the weigh-in ahead of Saturday's PBC on Prime Video pay-per-view. Gervonta Davis versus Frank Martin. Oh, we got David Benavidez and Alexander Gvozdyk as well. But, Luke, we expected a volatile face-off between Tank and Frank given the build-up to this week. What did you think about what we saw up there?
Plenty of vitriol, plenty of anger, plenty of trash talk. I will say, first things first, the condition that Frank Martin appears to be in physically is absurd. We are told that we're supposed to get a conversation with him here on this broadcast, so we're looking forward to talking with him. But he appeared to be in phenomenal condition. Tank Davis, a ready 133.4, kind of indicating, I don't know what his hopes are for 130, but if you're making 133.4, I don't know what's so crazy about making 130. I'm not saying he could easily do it, but it didn't seem out of the realm of possibility. But another conversation.
Neither here nor there.
Neither here nor there, as I like to say. Certainly not part of today's conversation. But both guys look ready. Both guys look confident. And the jawing that goes back and forth. The thing that we talked about, BC, was that it looked like to me, certainly we all know Gervonta's been here many times.
Yes.
This is Frank's first time at the big show. It does look like you're getting a bit of a bullying kind of element from Tank towards Frank. He is trying to kind of big brother him a little bit about the readiness and about the sort of the grandeur of it all. I don't know if it'll have an effect, but he's definitely trying.
Well, you heard Tank Davis tell Jordan Plant in the interview after the weigh-in and the face-off there that he's just trying to get in the head of Frank. I mean, look, he has felt all along that not only is Frank not on his level from the experience, from the combination of explosive speed and power, although Frank brings a lot to the table, but I think the big brothering, it's certainly aimed at the idea of trying to lower the confidence of Frank, who's going to have to deal with the grandeur of this event for the first time, the brightest lights possible, the pay-per-view, close-up that this is. But, Luke, I still feel like Tank keeps a respect for the danger that's across from him, that this is all a calculated move, and that he wants the very best of Frank to come out because, like his trainer Calvin Ford said, press that button. We want to see what's in Gervonta. I think never before have we seen Gervonta this motivated to really show us what he's all about. 14-month layoff. A lot is going on in boxing while he's been sitting idle. Now he's back. And I don't think we can look too far past what's going on social media and behind the scenes with his war with Floyd Mayweather. All of that is coming in
also
to prepare Tank to really want to make a big statement on Saturday.
And also just a smaller note, but something that kind of does matter. Yesterday, Leonard Ellerbe was, resigned or fired from Mayweather Promotions, but he was there on stage today with Tank.
GTD?
With the GTD, which is the promotional company, obviously, for Tank Davis. So they're trying to put on and maybe it fully is a happy front or a united front or whatever you want to call it, but certainly some outside of the ring interesting drama that's happening. And again, one more time, Tank Davis trying to let his tenure in these big fight positions kind of carry him to a bullying position over Frank Martin. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, we're certainly hoping that Frank Martin will be here in moments as they're
some of the media is like waddling back in from being down there in the arena.
Hopefully there's some Pedialyte being absorbed or something like that, you know what I mean, to after stepping on the scales. But both guys coming in absolutely ripped as we expected. So, look, the whole idea now, and we've set the stage this entire week. We appreciate everybody who's been with us here on the Morning Combat channel, from our Radio Row special to our special edition live Morning Combat episode earlier today. But it's this whole idea. Can Frank press the button? And if he does, it elevates his chances of winning. It also elevates his chances of getting out of there destructively. Does Frank Martin, in your opinion, Luke, need to seriously risk that one-punch clean knockout to break through against a fighter who's a 7-1 betting favorite against him to really make his mark in this
I don't
moment?
think he does need to go super risky. No, I think if you go super risky and you go super aggressive, you're going to end up face first on the canvas like Rolando Romero. That's simply a reality. Now, of course, you can get backed up into a corner like Leo Santa Cruz, and that's true too. I don't think it's one of those situations. What I'm going to say is I think it's going to be a lot of stick and move, not giving Gervonta a lot of opportunities to counter, not trying to forcefully corner him, but outwork him with movement, outwork him with stick, outwork him with angles, outwork him with lateral positioning. I think that's really the part where you're going to have getting Gervonta to turn, getting him to follow, but not so much I'm going to stand in front of you long enough to get countered or lunge at you, because again, it's not even really a function of standing in front of Tank, just trying to be big movements in front of him, big position changes in front of him. He makes people pay for that. I think it's the opposite. Consistent drip of effort, but nothing too high, nothing too low, right in the middle. Pitbull Cruz is different. Gervonta had a hurt hand for that fight, and Pitbull Cruz is a walk-forward kind of guy.
I wanted to bring that up.
But what I was going to say was, eventually that fight's kind of settled into a rhythm for both of those guys. And, yes, Gervonta was ahead the whole time, or so, especially late he was ahead in that fight. But the point I wanted to make was Frank needs to find some kind of a stasis like that, not getting over his skis, but not letting Gervonta walk him down either.
I was going to mention that because if we're looking at Gervonta and the biggest hits on the pay-per-view level in recent years, what has been the closest fight or the closest he came to losing, it was that close decision win over late replacement Pitbull Cruz when Rolly Romero had to pull out of their originally scheduled fight with the negative headlines and the accusations. I think we're ultimately, dropped, proven false, what have you on there.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But it made a much more difficult fight in the moment for Tank. So they're not the same fighter, Frank Martin and Isaac Pitbull Cruz. And to be fair to Cruz, I think what he showed us that night was not only the toughness and the Mexican chin that he brings to the table, but he was a much better boxer than I think we gave him credit for in terms of how he navigated that fight with Tank Davis. So if Frank Martin leans on his physical skills, is his boxing ability on that level to keep himself into the fight late and really have a shot at putting the pressure on the scorecards against Tank?
I think part of what Tank is doing is not just to bully him in the sense to get him to back down, but to your point, I think he's trying to raise his ire. He's trying to get Frank to a position where Frank is like, aha, you guys think that Tank Davis is the big star in boxing, and all along I think he might say to himself, it's actually been me and I'm going to be the guy. And he wants him to go and reach for it in a way that would ultimately prove difficult, or it would prove, I won't say fatal, but fatal to his chances of victory. They want him to rage at Tank. They want him to do that.
Yeah, you want him in fight or flight mode, and whether you can get him there through intimidation and fear, or you can get him in there through overconfidence. I mean, Frank, he's not really. Look, when you match up their skills, Tank shouldn't be a 7-1 betting favorite, right? I know how betting lines move and based on where you put him there,
it's
but
a little strong, yeah.
Like, if you watch Frank Martin's resume and you look at the fights he won to get to this point, the Michelle Rivera one was a big one when they were both unbeaten lightweights and they came together. Man, showing you with his ability that it appears he belongs on here. So I don't think necessarily that he's going to get dragged into that from the standpoint of I'm going to make you so mad or I'm going to make you so eager to jump steps ahead of the game plan. But what about when Tank hits him for the first time? Because Tank doesn't waste punches. He's one of the most economical counterpunchers that we've seen in this game. Canelo Alvarez being another one, but maybe even the difference between the two, although Canelo does have great power that he's carried up in weight, is when Tank gets you with that calculated shot. Think the one that he dropped Ryan Garcia with early, or the one that he hit Leo Santa Cruz with late. The fight's typically over, Luke. If it's not over in that instant, it changes the tenor of it so much because of the speed, accuracy, and the real big-time power of Tank. Can Frank Martin, what have we seen of his chin? What have we seen of his mental fortitude to be able to come back in situations where it's not going his way? From what we know, do you think he'll crumble under the pressure and Tank can create that moment? Or do you think we'll see the very best execution of what Frank has in this one?
I think early and perhaps even middle rounds, I think you're going to see pretty great execution from Frank. Well-schooled, well-trained. A guy who I think is almost, to a sense, overly technical. He's almost overly technical, I think, in a way to make up for the fact that he hasn't started boxing until 2017, roughly, right? So it's a guy who is trying to, do everything by the book. I tend to think he'll keep it along that, but there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One, there's been a lot of talk this week about whether or not Frank Martin can take body damage based on some of the things we saw in the Haratunian fight and whatnot. And as you mentioned, one of the shots that dropped Ryan Garcia was, of course, the shot to the body. Tank Davis has good opportunity to blast people upstairs, but he can do it to the body as well. A dynamic puncher. By the way, 2 southpaws here, so you won't have the open stance issues. Nevertheless, I think that's going to be something to watch. If he blasts him to the body, what does that do? That's part one. The second one is I actually feel like Frank is going to be able to delay the big shot through probably 6 rounds. I don't think that Gervonta is going to really get a solid shot off until after that. Frank is smart. Frank cuts angles. Frank gets outside. He can slip and counter. He's got a fantastic pull-to counter in my judgment. It's the second half of the fight where I think things could begin to shift, where Gervonta might up the intensity a little bit, create more traps, do a little bit more to start taking away the fight from him. That's where I think the fight's going to be won or lost.
Yeah, that's where we really need to see not just the backbone of Frank, not just the chin, but can he have the adaptability? He's got a great world-class trainer in his corner, and Derek James. And it's tough to be in the Derek James spot because you get a lot of celebrity clients. You become the trainer of the year, which he was a couple years ago. And then the more celebrity clients you add, the more big fights you're in, and you're not always going to win them all. And then suddenly everyone's like, does Derek James still have that magic touch? Derek James is still such a brilliant tacticianer. My point is, he'll prepare you for that battle. I like who Frank is under Derek James's tutelage. Is the Derek James effect going to have any effect in this fight? I mean, when you're in the camp with Errol Spence and Jermell Charlo and Ryan Garcia and Anthony Joshua, Frank Martin's going to grow from that. But is Frank Martin on that level? Can Derek James lift him up to that level? Do you think about that?
We have not seen him prove that he's on that level. I guess we'll find out tomorrow, right? There's nothing else that Frank Martin has done that is analogous to this. This is apart from every other achievement he has had in boxing, and by a considerable distance. It's a big distance from Michel Rivera to Tank Davis.
Sure.
It's a big distance from, I forget his first name, but Hartunian to Tank Davis. So this is the ultimate proving ground about, pardon my words here, BC, the upper bound limits of what Frank Martin can. But I'm being serious. Like, there is some criticism of Tank Davis that he has not really faced the best in his division, and there is some truth to that, for sure. So he is the guy who is but nevertheless, he's still ranked pound for pound. He's still ranked in these places. For Frank Martin to get a win against him like this would be enormously both damaging, I think, to the stock of Tank Davis. I will say that quite loudly, but also an insane boost for Frank Martin. It's a big difference between beating a guy who's not ranked pound for pound versus a guy who's ranked inside the top 5.
And a guy who is, on the short list of who is the face of the sport, right? It's Canelo Alvarez. It was Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, Usyk, all that, but also Tank Davis and what he's built and the trajectory that he appears to be on. But going back to the weigh-in and the face-off for a second, we were both a little bit impressed by Frank actually chirping back at him at a pretty high level, going nose-to-nose, not backing up. I almost wanted to see Frank give a little physical shove, just to be like, yo, you're not walking over me.
The commission hates that, so guys get talked out of it, but I'm with you a little bit, a little pushing and shoving.
Or do you feel like if you're Frank that you're almost double-crossing yourself in the mental game, playing into what Tank wants you to do?
Yeah, probably that as well. Like, they just want to do – you want to – fighters, from what they tell me, we've never done these weigh-ins as personal actors, but what they say is you want to stay in your space, in your comfort zone, in your mental attitude, whatever that is, without letting someone else disrupt your peace and disrupt what you're doing. And you can see Tank Davis getting in his face kind of a few times, almost forcing Frank Martin to withdraw, right, just to get out of the way. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get him to play their game with whatever tool they possibly can that's legal.
Yeah, all right, let's talk about some of the betting realizations here and what's at stake in this main event. And, Luke, when we're talking about that, we're talking about a great partner in this game, and we're talking about DraftKings Sportsbook, our partner in what we do here on Morning Combat. And, Luke, a lot of bets coming in on Tank early KO first round. I don't think that's going to happen. But we got a great offer if you're thinking about putting a little cash on this fight based on our analysis, based on what we've seen here on the stage, on the scales, right, in the arena next door. How about this for new customers here? Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app today. Use our promo code MK. Put $5 down on any fight. You want to go Benavidez, Gvozdyk. You want to do whatever you want here. Parlays and all that.
Oh, by the way, I found the over-under on this one.
Hold on a second. $5 down will get you $150 instantly in bonus bets. So you like Tank KO1? Put that $5 down. $150 coming your way. Luke, with DraftKings, we know a little bit about what this crown means, right?
Yeah, it's yours.
It's yours. So download that today. Use our promo code MK. It's going to be a fun weekend. Get into these betting odds here. What were you saying?
I saw that the over-under for this bout, 9.5 rounds. What do you think?
That's a great place to start at when we're talking about the betting here. I've been feeling all week like a knockout is inevitable. Either Frank shocks the world or Tank leads him into a very good fight. They're both going to have the moments. They're both going to have the adjustments. But I think when Frank enters a period where I have to try to win this fight, you're playing against the guy who has the great equalizer. And again, it's not just the power, it's the ability to place it. Look at those CompuBox stats. Gervonta Davis shatters those when you talk about the accuracy of his power punches, doesn't waste shots, all of that. But the determination in Frank is making me wonder. So, Luke, what do I think? I think you got to go the under here because I do think Gervonta is so motivated to make a statement, and I think because of the way Frank Martin is wired in, because he's a very good elite fighter at that same time, he's almost going to force Gervonta Davis to stop this on the under. Even though the motivation of Frank is pulling me in both directions, I think you got to go the under here.
I'm going to take the under as well on this one. I think, which is kind of crazy, because if Frank Martin pitched a shutout through 6 rounds, I would not be surprised. I absolutely
well, shutout so you're saying Gervonta will punt a couple early ones to read him?
For sure, he's going to punt 2, potentially 3. Yes.
Unless he tries to send a message early.
That's possible too.
Like Floyd did to Manny in round 1.
It's possible. It's possible. But again, I'm not declaring to you Frank is going to win the first 6. I'm saying, imagine they were a little bit nip and tuck, but Frank was the guy who was just busier. Sometimes Gervonta loses rounds because the other guy just does more work. But after that is really, to me, where I think things are going to come apart. And when they come apart, they'll come apart pretty quickly. If it is, in fact, true that we can declare after this bout that Frank Martin can't take body damage and that Gervonta was able to show that potentially in a bout like this, I think he'll come on. I think when he comes unglued, he's going to come totally unglued. It'll go downhill quickly.
I agree with that. Here's what also plays into this. It takes not a front runner, but outside of Pitbull Cruz pushing him late in the fight, Yuriorkis Gamboa to some degree kind of pushed him too where he went late. That was more in development stages. But it's not like we've seen Tank down from what I can remember. It's certainly not majorly hurt where he's had to rally back and win fights by knockout. What do we assume is Tank Davis's level of recuperative skills, of ability to fight through, not only maybe if he's down on the cards or maybe if he is dropped early, maybe if this turns into a wild fight. We've kind of never seen that from him.
That's exactly right. I'm trying to think of like when I've seen Tank win fights late. I don't know if I've ever seen him properly rally.
Right.
Right? Where someone was like putting sustained offense on him late in a fight and he was down and was really struggling.
Are you live, Corey Manich? Wow.
Yeah, they want to hear. I want to hear. The audience should hear you.
This is our producer,
So
Manich.
what was the fight where the clip came out in All Access where Floyd told him he was down on the cards? Was that Barrios? Remember that clip?
Yes.
That was Barrios,
How
right?
far into
You're
the
right.
fight
Okay.
was that?
It was
That was a
like
close
7
fight.
or 8 rounds.
That's about
something
right.
like
And
that.
that was a very close fight.
And he
I
stopped.
think
He
he was
stopped him
up.
in the 11th.
Yeah, I think he was probably realistically up on the cards, but
That's a great
Floyd
example,
told
Corey.
him he was down, and he said that he locked into a new mode with that.
I'm glad you brought that up because that fight was maybe the only time it was physically taxing for Tank because he was up a weight class, gets
Up
a
a weight
bigger
class,
cut.
yes.
Now, Barrios' style is not to lean in and really put that weight on you as the bigger guy. But will we see Frank try to initiate physical contact in that way?
I feel like Frank he can lead when guys are really shelled up. I don't think that's going to be GTD. I think he's going to be hunting a little bit, but a little bit more on the back foot, honestly. I think Frank wants to counter. So that's going to be interesting. Does Davis go to him, or does Davis make Frank come to him? Which way is he going to play it? Because that's going to have a dramatic impact on the way, obviously, the fight looks, and I think how long it goes on top of that.
I wouldn't be super shocked if Frank Martin does this. I've called him a live dog, and I believe in that. I'm not going to be utterly blown away. It'll be a shocking moment in there, but I'm also having trouble completing the vision and really chronicling that path to victory for him. Luke, I like Gervonta Davis inside the distance. If 9.5 is ultimately that decider in there, I almost like him 8th or 9th round, around that area.
That's exactly where I am, yes. I think Frank Martin is going to put up a well-schooled, commendable effort for probably a decent distance. I just don't see it going, what the fuck do we know? But
yeah, I mean, we should probably tell him our prediction when he gets here if we end up.
Oh, we're not getting him. Yeah, right there, Manich?
I've been told that we're most likely not getting Frank.
Yeah.
That he went right up to his room after.
Yeah, we're not getting him.
So
All right, maybe that's where the Pedialyte is.
They're
yeah.
trying, but
They're trying.
yeah, it's not looking great.
All right.
Awesome.
Here we go. We're going to keep rolling on, though. Luke, we got to get into this co-main event.
All right.
They're getting him for all the smoke fight, though. So there's going to be clips that come out afterwards with Stack, Tank,
Steven
and
Jackson on the ground.
And Frank, yeah.
Thank you very much.
He was
Manich.
like, just not those two bums from the East Coast.
From Jersey City. Hey, let's get into that co-main event, though. A light heavyweight interim title at stake in the WBC, and it's David Benavidez moving up in weight, taking on the former champion Alexander Gvozdyk. Benavidez looked, when we sat down with him yesterday, like he was in the midst of a decently tough weight cut. It's not the 168 cut, it was the 175, but he ended up making weight seemingly without issue up there. What'd you make of that?
I think a guy like that, even if it is a bit of a tough weight cut, he's so mentally confident, so mentally dialed in. You notice, for example, like he still has clarity of thought. He doesn't stumble over his words. He can switch between languages. He always knows, I got to salute the crowd. I have to thank these people. Have you noticed that? You never see him stumble mentally on how to answer questions or what to do or what he knows he has the answer and the access to that information right away, which kind of tells you that the cut is probably not easy, but it's definitely not devastating. It's definitely not that difficult ultimately if he's able to like both perform the way he performs and just kind of, did he look a little sucked out, a little cotton-mouthy yesterday? A little bit, for sure. But I really don't believe it's going to hinder his performance.
Well, I
tomorrow.
believe when he says it that he's sort of locked in on the Spartan lifestyle. What did he say? No sugar in his diet when we talked to him yesterday at all. There was a time where we worried a little bit more about his weight. Maybe even up until the Caleb Plant breakthrough performance, we worried a little bit about his weight. So. And let's not forget, he's a undefeated fighter, but he's a two-time former super middleweight champion because he lost the belt on the scales early on in COVID, but a couple years earlier, of course, with the recreational drug use for cocaine suspension there, lost that title a second time. But, Luke, it's great to see not just the maturity and evolution of a fighter, and I think Benavidez has evolved so quickly that I now have him at the back end of my pound-for-pound list and really believe he's pushing, and you know, this fight could be a boost for him in that regard and really starting to crack that inner core of the players in this sport. But I never thought he would be here or be this fighter. And I know that there's, you know, arguably the best 168er right now, although he probably won't get that chance against Canelo, or maybe we'll see to prove it. But he's not waiting on that. He's moving up in weight. If he wins this against Gvozdyk, he could be fighting the winner of Bivol versus Better Beef. We had Jim Lampley here yesterday saying us, really Benavidez could one day move up to heavyweight and really capture that imagination, although Andy Ruiz did it briefly of being the, you know, Mexican-American heavyweight champion in that regard. But, Luke, you got to give him credit of how he's leveled up his game maturity-wise as he's climbing the ladder. And when you get up there in the thin air, there's no room for error. And I don't have that fear maybe early on because he came into the title at age 20, remember, that he's going to fall off the rails.
I don't have hardly any concerns. Does this look to you like a guy who didn't prepare, or that the cut got the best of him, or the contours of the fight game somehow messed him up like along the way because he just didn't know what he was doing? I mean, BC, I've had every doubt that you have had. Dude, our first Showtime broadcast that we did for a fight, it was during the early parts of the pandemic, was interviewing David Benavidez after he missed weight.
Was that against Romer Angulo?
Something like that.
Yeah.
But it was our very first assignment together working on it for Showtime Boxing. I will say, don't you agree that the last two fights, Caleb Plant and Demetrius Andrade, the guy that he has turned into past those two performances, whatever he was when he was missing weight on the scales and losing his title for this, that, and the other, seems like a distant memory.
I fully agree.
He has learned. Listen, some guys are fuck-ups in their early 20s, and they just stay fuck-ups. But there's another kind of guy that is talented and messes up early, but then figures it out and really never looks back afterwards. That's David Benavidez. That's a guy who didn't have a perfect, at least now he has he's undefeated, but I mean like a perfect record in the overall sense of behavior and professionalism. Dude, he went from a guy having lackluster professionalism to having some of the best professionalism I've seen in the fight game.
And then, we talked to Steven Jackson earlier today on our episode of Morning Combat from the Blue Wire Sirius XM studios over there at the Wynn. And for him to say, shooting the Fight Town episode in Miami and getting really behind-the-scenes work in the gym, the level of detail mentally that Benavidez puts in, the questions that he asks, the constant search for knowledge. Look, you never guessed that he would eventually be this guy. I never guessed that his game would level up where you continue to put downhill pressure on any opponent. Demetrius Andrade, who never lost, was never really physically dominated at all. That guy basically chose not to continue in that fight after the violence that was put on him. So this is an all-new level of dialed in of where he's at, of what he's capable of. I love when you talked to him yesterday about how he squares up, which is almost a cardinal sin in boxing, but can do it in a way that he's still defensively sound and just puts that pressure on top of you. It's almost like what Sean Strickland does, but then you add in the power.
That's right. Yeah. For MMA fans, he has the same kind of square stand in front of you bit. And he does a lot more just blocking and absorbing. He doesn't quite roll in the same way, and Sean's a little bit more of a roll and like a parry kind of guy. But to your point, the firepower coming back the other way, dude, get out of town. David Benavidez is as close to guaranteed action as you are going to get in the entire sport of boxing. So for him to be squared in front of his opponents yes, take some of their abuse, but never let it deter him. And then in the end, look at the round numbers with most of his opponents, even from the early rounds, but certainly by round 3 or 4, he is outworking them the entire time. He's not a wave that hits you, BC.
Right.
He is a downpour that rains on you, and you can't get out of it.
It gets worse as the fight goes on.
It does.
He continues to go further downhill. He almost steps up his pace. It's almost as if
the Andrade fight's a great example of that.
Right. It's almost as if his power increases and he gets nastier once he can sense that you are taking a step in the wrong direction, that your fatigue is catching up with you, that maybe you didn't like the way that punch felt. I mean, Andrade actually had success. People look back and they go, oh, he got absolutely dominated. He did. But he had success in rounds 2, 3, and 4. I watched that fight from ringside, and you're starting to go, hey, maybe he's figured something out there. But it's, can you take the heat inside the kitchen as you're cooking up this meal, as the counter punches start coming back, as he physically starts to lean on you in the corner and take over? It becomes a question of not if, but when. So, Luke, as we transfer that to his opponent on Saturday, the very experienced former champion Alexander Gvozdyk, who took off 3.5 years, retired after that knockout title loss to Artur Beterbiev in their unification in Philadelphia back 5 years ago. Yes, he's won 3 fights in the comeback last year, but he's 37 years old. So, Luke, even though he's got world-class skills, and maybe prime versus prime, if things were even, he could give Benavidez things to have to deal with that are difficult from a technique, from a point-fighting way. But he's got to solve that same equation that Andrade couldn't. That when he starts going down on hill on you, is it even going to matter?
Dude, I think when things go from bad to worse with David Benavidez in front of you, they don't go back. Like, there's no rallying. Caleb Plant survived. Credit to him. And again, had a good 12th round in the sense. He survived, but he didn't, like, storm back. He didn't come back and, like, really rally himself. He just showed great grit and fortitude to outlast in the end. Demetrius Andrade couldn't even do that, dude. When he is moving downhill on you, it's effectively over at that point. And to the thing you bring up, he does start out, I'm not going to say slow, but, you know, he starts out a little bit more measured, certainly. But the thing about it is he figures out all the little things that work, all the little openings, all the little combinations, all the little targets, and where you react to him and what it opens. And once he unlocks the door, he can just steal anything he wants out of the house.
Yes.
That's really what happens. Once he breaks the door down, it's over for you.
Now, can Alexander Gvozdyk turn back the clock to a certain degree? Can he raise his game knowing the danger across from him? And boy, obviously, as Gvozdyk a professional, comes from that legendary
also in
Ukrainian
tremendous condition.
In tremendous shape, comes from that legendary Ukrainian amateur class with the likes of Lomachenko, Usyk, Barinchik, who just won a world title. I mean, so many legends coming out of there. I think Victor Postal was part of that group. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong there. But here's the deal, though, Luke. Can he box from the outside? Yes. Can he hang in there? But if he can't hurt Benavidez, and who has, right? I mean, early on in Benavidez' career when he was younger, he got dropped in his first title win late in the fight. I think it was a draw. He came back and won the rematch against Ronald Gavril, I believe, or Ronald Gavril, excuse me. But that's a different Benavidez at a different time. If I'm going to ask you, and if I can tell you I can see the future, and Gvozdyk will not be able to bother or hurt or prevent Benavidez from taking a step forward, then when does this fight end by knockout? Or stoppage or something in that regard.
6 or 7. I actually feel like Gvozdyk will do well through, 2-3 rounds. Round 4, I think, is when, if it doesn't flip before that, it'll certainly flip from that point on.
And I'll give him the credit that he's such a professional and so experienced that he could raise his game in the face of higher danger compared to who he fought last year. But we called one of his 3 fights on a Showtime pay-per-view undercard last year, his 3 comeback fights. And he looked good, Luke, but he didn't look spectacular.
He didn't look dangerous.
That's the great point.
He didn't look dangerous. He looked competent. He is a competent boxer.
He's a smart boxer.
He's a smart boxer. He is a talented athlete. He is a hard-working professional. And so you saw those things.
Yeah.
But what you didn't see was the kind of thing Benavidez brings, which is danger, which is there's one punch and everything else behind that is going to be impossible to stop. You just felt like he could competently box his way around lesser opposition. Benavidez is not lesser opposition.
Now, to Gvozdyk's credit, his biggest win was going in there in Canada in Adonis Stevenson, the long-reigning light heavyweight champion, and not only knocking him out late and finishing him, sending him into retirement and unfortunately a health scare, but then the next fight, Gvozdyk goes through the same thing, right? He had the scare of the brain bleed after the loss to Beterbiev.
It's like the BMF title. Whoever wins it in their next fight, they get viciously KO'd.
But yet late in that fight, now look, he's facing Beterbiev, who's an all-timer. But late in that fight, he got physically worn down, outworked. We had Bredman Edwards in this chair yesterday kind of really giving us a reminder of that. And Luke, he was physically dominated. Then you had the health scare. Then he sits out 3.5 years. Is it possible for Gvozdyk to reestablish who he was in the Stevenson fight? Or does what happened against Beterbiev and losing your invincibility, taking your first defeat, but doing it that violently where it was just he had no answer late, that kind of changes a man, doesn't it?
It does, and also, like, here's the thing. You're asking me, could he do what he did against Adonis Stevenson? Maybe to other 175ers not named Benavidez, Bivol, or Beterbiev, but maybe to some other 175er?
Sure.
I don't think that's necessarily out of the question. It just seems impossible. I mean, here's the thing about David Benavidez, BC. He's a force of nature. Now, at 175, we don't exactly know how much of that will translate. I actually think he's going to look good. He might even look better. He probably is carrying a little bit more muscle. He's probably going to, I think his speed is still going to be there, his hand speed, which is important, the combination work. I really, really feel like Gvozdyk, I respect what he has done. I certainly respect what he efforts at. He is just attempting something against a physical force that you need to have really, really special grit, big firepower, and a lot more. And I just feel like Gvozdyk has good boxing skill, but at this stage, not those things.
All right, over-under, it's not. I don't think it's going over. So
No.
I don't even know what the over-under is.
I don't know on this fight either.
I'll tell you offhand, I got Benavidez by 7th round stoppage. I think they're going to throw in the towel. I think there'll be a couple knockdowns and taking a standing beating, and that's where the fight's over.
Yeah, I'll probably say the same. I'll say 7th round stoppage as well, David Benavidez. He's going to shine.
All right, he's
tomorrow
escalating
night.
his star. He's escalating his critical reputation and respect that we have for him. If he stops Gvozdyk in it's not his light heavyweight debut, but his spotlight moment here to get into the title mix. He'll have the interim title if he wins at WBC. We're all waiting in October when Bivol, Beterbiev, and Saudi Arabia finally do it for all 4 world titles, 2 unbeaten champions, 2 future Hall of Famers. How big, potentially, I mean, maybe it won't be that huge because not all of these guys are household names, but if he fights the winner of Bivol, Beterbiev, and if we get it maybe with Saudi Arabia with a ton of money and promotion put into there, Benavidez' star might be at a point at that point where he might not even need Canelo.
I honestly feel like if he beats Beterbiev or Bivol, he'll turn into something approximating a global superstar. Now, that's a little strong. I realize I'm not declaring it's the same as beating Canelo. It's clearly not. But I feel like what he's doing right now is setting the table, not just for bigger fights, but for the kind of stage, the world stage, where you're taking on the biggest names in boxing, in the biggest cards, in the biggest bouts of consequence. You're going to turn your division into something. And also, we haven't really talked about it much because why would you need to? They seem still a little bit far apart. There's a David Morrell factor in this division as well. He's on his way up at 175. We'll see what happens with him.
Is he Benavidez' kryptonite if Benavidez passes all these crazy tests?
That's exactly right. So I feel like what's happening is Benavidez is setting himself up for beating the kinds of names that get you pound-for-pound stature and blazing a path in this new weight class where if he can keep doing this, again, would beating Canelo be better? Probably it would be better. But he's on the way to establishing himself as a pound-for-pound ranked top fighter in the sport, and I think a potential big-time star in the sport of boxing.
Corey's going to say something.
By the way, the line is 9.5.
9.5 is the over-under.
Also
on the
co-main?
Yep.
I would take the under.
The under. I'm taking the under
in that.
To put a button on the Canelo situation, now Benavidez, when he sat here, did say maybe it will happen one day. Is there any scenario in your eyes, like if Benavidez goes all the way and beats the winner of Beterbiev? I mean, we're really projecting here, but let's say he did that. Would that be more likely for Canelo to go, okay, the star Benavidez will be at that point if it happens?
Dude, no, Canelo's going to – I mean, it's a guess. My guess is if Benavidez does something like that, he's going to say, why does he want me to fight me at 168? He's the 175 star. I'll stay here. I just don't think he wants that fight.
So you think here's what I'll say. I'll think maybe Canelo goes, okay, it's got to be at 168, and maybe he wants him to get a little comfortable at 175 physically. I mean, this is some dirty backhanded moves.
To make it really, really tough on him?
And maybe he's hoping at that point he really would get a $200 million payday from Turki Al-Sheikh.
It's possible. Yeah, it's possible.
It's interesting to think about there. Quickly on the rest of the main card here, just in terms of what you're looking for. I'm going to go first and say now full middleweight title holder Carlos Adames, who had to wait finally for Jermall Charlo to get, I don't know if he was stripped or is he champion in recess. It was a long process. Obviously, Jermall Charlo's had troubles outside the ring. Adames just re-signed with PBC. He's finally going to get his moment. Terrell Gausha is going to be his opponent to defend the title. But I think when you look at the rest of this card, Adames has the biggest opportunity. Maybe Gary Antoine Russell, too. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
To announce himself, to really make a big statement in a moment. Gausha's not easy by any means. Technical fighter and Olympian. But Adames is riding like that fuck you feeling, right? Where he's going to come back and take what he feels is his.
I'm going to go with Gary Antoine Russell. I mean, obviously the DMV guys, the DC guys, I'm going to ride with them. He's had nothing but stoppages, undefeated.
Sure.
The kind of opponent he's got in Puello is not the kind that's going to wow the general crowd because they're really not going to know. But it's the kind of, I would say, credible opponent that's going to do wonders for his stock within boxing circles and then set him up now to start getting some really big potential opponents. By the way, we had Steven Espinosa here telling us that Amazon is going to be airing some of these non-pay-per-view PBC cards, and some of the early rumors are with Caleb Plant and Stephen Fulton. I think with a win, Gary Antoine Russell, maybe not headlining, I don't know, but certainly finds himself on spaces like that where he is not a pay-per-view star. He's not being close to that yet. But these are the kind of like Postal and these are the kinds of names that boxing insiders know, respect, and I know Postal was older as well, but I'm just simply saying a valued opponent. They're setting this guy up to do big things. I think he's 27 years old. The next year or two.
Today's his birthday.
Yeah. The next year or two going to be a real big years for Gary Antoine Russell.
He's got to get past this test, and if you're wondering, Alberto Puello, or Puello, as you once called him when we called this fight.
It depends how you want to pronounce it, but you can do
tomato.
The Argentines would say Puello.
Here's the thing about Puello. He's undefeated. He's a former champion at 140. Remember, he got stripped of his belt for the pop-in for the dirty test. But we saw him make that comeback. We called his comeback fight on the PBC undercards, and he's a legitimate test for what Gary Antoine Russell brings to the table. Cannot wait.
Pretty slick.
Pretty slick. Luke, one more time. You want to talk about this great partnership we got going on this weekend?
Yeah, DraftKings, baby. So here's what you got to do: DraftKings Sportsbook app. Go get it. Just go get it right now. And what you're going to do is, if you put $5 down on any bet related to, let's say, Tank Martin. Or
new customers only.
New customers only, of course, but you put a bet down. They're going to give you $150 back in bonus bets, but you got to use our promo code, and that's MK.
MK, you want to make a big parlay of the weekend, get Game 4 of the NBA Finals, mix it with UFC Fight Night, whatever your pleasure is and your flavor, you can get after it. New customers, get in on this. $5 down, $150 in bonus bets. Use our code MK. DraftKings. The crown is yours. Wear it. Own it.
Are you still tripping from the Grateful Dead concert?
Be it. No, I'm perfectly professional and healthy at this moment, Luke. How dare you? Any other takeaways from this fight week as we close down here, Luke?
Was it as Gervonta Davis called it?
He was upset they did not put his banner on the side of the MGM Grand. According to Dan Raffel's podcast, that's what Tank told him.
Yeah.
They did put a last minute, it seems.
I did see it. Yeah, I did see it. I'll tell you what. I think Martin and Gvozdyk have been quiet opponents. They have not done a ton of media. I mean, I haven't seen Gvozdyk do anything. But Martin has not done much. I know he did the Pivot podcast, which is a big one.
Sure.
He's done a couple of things. He didn't do this show, so that's unfortunate. But what I wanted to say was it's been quiet, but I really believe, if I can be honest, I really believe that come fight time, I do think Gvozdyk is overmatched. And maybe Martin too, but I'm expecting two guys who are absolutely going to give it their all en route to very exciting fights that at times will have big swings in momentum.
We're going to find out Saturday night, PBC on Prime Video, pay-per-view from the MGM Grand Garden Arena here in Las Vegas, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We've had so much fun this week. Shout out to our great staff and crew. How about Manich? That's our guy right
there.
Right?
Manich.
Hey, Manich. How about Paige getting us those acai
Johnny
shakes?
On the spot.
All right.
Johnny on the spot.
Shout out to Bricktoberfest and our sound guy, Ty, from episode 6 of the MK
He
Donkey
showed
Memories.
up not sober. I'll just be honest about that.
Okay, all right. How dare you?
I'm teasing.
To close, Alexander Gvozdyk, we had this conversation off camera. He calls himself the nail. I'd rather be the hammer. What is he saying?
I don't know.
Because he might be the nail if he keeps this attitude up. Maybe it's more about like what he says
I'll
to
tell
women.
you what, David Benavidez is going to be a fucking hammer.
Maybe
Saturday.
it's more of like a pickup line for chicks. Like, we're going to nail each outer.
Yeah, we're going to nail each outer.
Each outer. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Monday, we will be back live.
You know what, Hosek? They should have Gvozdyk fight Big Bang. I know they're not in the same weight class at all. but he goes, I'm going to nail you. And then Big Bang goes, I'm going to bang you.
Oh, wow. This is
Yeah.
hot and heavy right there. Who's going to be the referee? Rocco? I mean, come on. All right. We got to get out of here. But Monday, we're back in the Metal Arc Studios, New York City,
Yes.
Manhattan, 11 a.m. Eastern, recapping what went down here in the PBC, UFC Fight Night, the continued fallout of all things UFC 303, Conor McGregor out, Poatan in, Hamzat out. We broke all that down earlier today in Morning Combat. Don't miss it. For Luke Thomas, I am Brian Campbell. All the smoke fight is the future, and we're a part of it. Don't miss it. We love you. We out of here.